Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 132, part 2, a look at two issue 167's. This time out, we take a look at Justice League of America, Volume 1, issue 167. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Ragate, and class is back in session. Folks, before we continue, I wanted to mention that while it's been tough for me to get into the studio to record issues of this podcast, I've still been busy podcasting at my school. 2 years ago, my good friend Jeff, the creator of Jep Comics, which I reviewed some years ago here on the show, and I started a podcast for our school, and it's really fun recording weekly podcasts with my students or recording episodes when we're on trips. And so for anybody who's interested in knowing more about my school's podcast, feel free to drop me a private message and I can pass it along to you. I figure it's safe enough for me to do so, given that our podcast is on the web, so anybody can access it. But it's been a lot of fun. It's helped me keep the ring rust off, to say. I have been looking very much forward to reviewing Justice League of America, Volume 1, Issue 167 for some time now, folks. I know I probably came across as pretty critical of The Flash, number 167, although hopefully you did hear me chuckling at points. I did find it a fun read overall, but issue number 167 of Justice League of America is just one of those seminal reads, and it's actually part of a three-parter. So as I'm giving my review, my focus will be on a more in-depth synopsis of issue 167, which is the middle chapter of the three-parter, but I'll also give you short synopses of the preceding and following issues. This is a key three-issue story in Justice League history, and prior to 2003, 2004, it's probably one of those stories which was still highly regarded, fondly remembered, but maybe not considered paramount in DC history. But then a really entertaining story by Mr. Brad Meltzer and Reg Morales came along. That was Identity Crisis, which revisited this three-issue body-swapping story. And Mr. Meltzer has in fact said that it was this three-part story by writer Jerry Conway and artists Dick Dillon and Frank McLaughlin that inspired an important element of Identity Crisis. So in addition to talking about just a great Bronze Age issue of Justice League of America, this also provides a really fun experience in terms of linking up stories that have been printed in different time periods. I'm even going to tie in this storyline with the famous J'accuse storyline, which is published not too much longer after this story by Mr. Conway and Dick Dillon. So a lot to get through, so let's begin. Again, thanks to Jason Jaroslawski for inspiring this study of issue 167 for both The Flash and JLA. Like I was saying, the point of commonality between these issues is that the writer remains highly regarded. Gardner Fox for The Flash and Jerry Conway for Justice League of America. Jerry Conway is considered a living legend, both within Marvel and DC. Of course, he was the writer who wrote those stories involving the death of the Stacys and brought Spider-Man back to his roots, and that Spider-Man was at a point in his career where he was feeling pretty good, pretty confident. And then with the death of Gwen Stacy, it brought him back and it made him consider the use of his powers. And it all spoke to the line, with great power comes great responsibility. And that storyline set Peter on a very interesting path, an interesting journey. Fortunately, things turned out pretty well for Peter with Mary Jane. But following the death of the Stacys, those Spider-Man stories were really gripping. And then Mr. Conway moved on to DC, where he had a nice run with Justice League of America, where he was partnered with longtime JLA artist Dick Dillon. And I've gushed about Mr. Dillon's work in the past. I should also say Frank McLaughlin, a very talented artist in his own right. I imagine here he was doing the inks here. Sadly, I learned that Mr. McLaughlin died only a few days ago, as of the time that I'm recording now. But Dick Dillon, well known for his Justice League run. Sadly, his work has come under fire just as Carmine Infantino's has. I've heard too many people say that Mr. Dillon's work looks wooden, it looks static, it looks outdated, outmoded, and I think, oh, that's so unfair. Before his time on Justice League of America, I'm just thinking of one particular issue of Blackhawks that was penciled by Mr. Dillon, and the artwork was light years ahead of its time, just in terms of the amount of detail that went into his design of the characters. Sorry, I had to take a call there, folks. I think Mr. Dillon's work after Blackhawks, going right through till his unfortunate demise, was brilliant. By his own admission, Mr. Dillon stated that coming on to Justice League of America title was quite daunting. He found it really difficult penciling for such a large cast of characters. And we also have to keep in mind that during his tenure, the Justice League entered its satellite era, in which the lineup increased, I'm not going to say exponentially, but it went beyond just the Great Seven, and there were characters constantly coming in and out of the book. And then with those JLA, JSA team-ups, which became more and more complex, with new Earths being introduced and more characters being added, it was a big task for Mr. Dillon to draw all of these iconic characters through the years. And he admitted that, drawing Superman could be tough. Getting the S shield right was difficult. But he persevered. And Mr. Dillon is one of those artists whose work just grew and grew as time progressed, until around 1970, right up until he died, his art was still growing. And I just think of the J'accuse two-parter, the story which involved the murder mystery surrounding Mr. Terrific. His artwork there was just brilliant, right in line with what artists like Neil Adams and Marshall Rogers and Mike Grell were doing. And I really enjoyed his artwork here on this three-parter. So yeah, for those who want to rail against Dick Dillon, I say go get stuffed. All right, let me get talking about this body-swapping storyline, which begins in the preceding issue, number 166. Issue 166 is the Justice League of America going up against the Secret Society of Supervillains, a supervillain team that was introduced during the DC implosion, and sadly their title was short-lived, but an interesting concept where the Wizard, an Earth 2 Superman foe, came over to Earth 1, put together this really weird hooded, cloaked, gauntlet-bound costume and teamed up with Earth 1 villains Blockbuster, Floronic Man, the alien Star Sapphire, who bore a spot-on resemblance to Carol Ferris when she was Star Sapphire, and Reverse Flash. A fun title, which just looked at the villains as the protagonists, and a tough book to write at that time, given that the Comics Code still had some teeth and said that villains could never be portrayed as enjoying success. The villains could never win, and the subsequent implosion in DC Comics led to cancellation of that title. But Secret Society of Supervillains concept stuck around. And so really interesting to see the Secret Society in this team-up story here. I could devote a whole episode of Comics in History to looking at issue 166. There's a lot of really good character development, especially on the part of Batman and in terms of how he interacts with Wonder Woman, looking at the nature of death, commemoration of death and funerals. But basically, in episode number 166, we get a bit of a recap of what's been going on with the Secret Society. They had to escape Earth 2 after they were defeated by the JSA. They didn't manage to make it across to a parallel Earth. They were stuck in a sort of a limbo state, but Reverse Flash was able to get them out after a few months, and they ended up crossing over to Earth 1. But the issue they found was that, well, they presumably made it all the way to Earth 1. Their soul cells were still stuck in that limbo world. And so here in issue 166, it turns out they're trying to figure out a way of getting free of that. And the first part of their plan actually involves invading the JLA satellite, where they take down Red Tornado, and they leave enough evidence that they actually want to get caught by the JLA. And so 5 of the Leaguers, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Zatanna, all follow the trail of breadcrumbs, and they find the Secret Society, where they quickly have a spell cast upon them, which switches the bodies of the 5 Leaguers and the 5 Secret Society members. A really daunting and great cliffhanger to that issue. And so now I want to get into talking about issue 167. Again, the cover date, June 1979. Writer Jerry Conway, artist Dick Dillon and Frank McLaughlin. This chapter is titled The League That Defeated Itself. And an interesting twist here by Jerry Conway. You might think, oh, okay, that title means that the Secret Society basically does itself in because they can't properly disguise themselves as heroes because they give in to their evil, selfish ways. And actually, no, they don't defeat themselves in this issue. It actually is the League that defeat themselves. But let's get into it. Great cover page by Mr. Dillon and McLaughlin, where the Wizard is trying to warn Green Arrow that not as all what it appears. Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, who's slapped a construct gag on the Wizard, looking kind of shocked and just hoping that Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, won't get too suspicious. Inside, great splash page where we see Superman and Green Lantern, Hal Jordan at this time, engaged in fisticuffs. And for those who did not read the first chapter, they might be thinking, what the heck is this? And it turns out bad guys will be bad guys. They're going to give in to their violent, selfish ways. And we see, quote-unquote, Superman admonishing, quote-unquote, Green Lantern for trying to engage him in combat because, for all, Professor Zoom now has the command of a Green Lantern ring. The Wizard is now in the body of Superman, who is infinitely more powerful than Green Lantern. And keeping in mind, this is the Bronze Age Earth 1